Joining me now is former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania and Olivia Troy, former senior aide for then Vice President Mike Pence during the first Trump administration. Olivia, let's start with you on this. As you look at some of the statements made by the president on social media regarding Canada, he was also mentioning Panama and Greenland in his holiday social media posts. While they were not mentioned during the campaign trail, this is not necessarily inconsistent with the way the president-elect has made his decisions and communicated them in the past. What do you make of why he's making these decisions now?
I think this is typical Donald Trump. He has a combative style when it comes to foreign policy endeavors, and that's him sort of giving a warning shot across the bow to these countries of his intent or how he views things. I would say that he's not technically guided by his own actual knowledge of foreign policy and strength. It's whatever advisor got in his ear beforehand, and sometimes he misconstrues things and delivers them in that way. But I think it's sort of the unpredictability of Donald Trump that is his foreign policy style. And we saw it in the first Trump administration. Many of us in national security had to figure out how to navigate it. And I think we're going to see it more emboldened this time around.
So as we look at this here, Congressman, there is the issue of the communication style, and then there's potential, the other side of the practical notions below it, which is, number one, are the fees too expensive at the Panama Canal? Number two, when you do look at Greenland and its proximity to Russia, that strategically for the United States, does that make sense? The United States has twice tried in the last, 150 years, 100 to 150 years, made an attempt to purchase Greenland in the past, perhaps for the same reasons. What's the practical side of this when you look at international security as well as comparative advantage, when we look at the economic possibilities?
Well, it just strikes me that Donald Trump really doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. When we talk about Denmark and by extension Greenland, these are NATO allies, as is Canada. And so our military, we have a base up there. We have access to Greenland. It's not on the other. It's not really neutral in that sense. And so I can't understand why he would pick a fight with Denmark, which a country that has been very close to us, as has been Canada. Again, there really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's a bit of really a bullying tactic, if anything else. Maybe he's just bloviating. But I think he's simply trying to assert himself. And in the case of Panama, the Panama Canal Zone is actually professionally run. I've been down there. And they charge those transit fees, if you will. And I believe everybody's charged the same. It's not like we're being charged more than others. And it's true that China does have some influence in Panama. But part of the reason why China has influence in Panama and other countries in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa is because the United States doesn't show up. We talk about this great competition with China, but you go to many of these countries, they tell you, yeah, it's really not a competition. The Chinese are here and you're not. And so the point is the Panama Canal Zone is run well. There's really no need to take it over. But again, I just think it sends some bad signals to our friends around the world that, America might not be as reliable as we once thought.
Olivia, you were a counterterrorism and homeland security advisor to Vice President Pence during the Trump administration, as I mentioned earlier. Were these very topics brought up before in his first administration for reasons regarding what I discussed earlier, national security, comparative advantage, economically or other?
Well, certainly Greenland was discussed over and over again. That's something that Donald Trump brought up during the first administration. I think the China influence has been brought up in terms of what's happening in terms of Latin America, but it has also been brought up in terms of Africa. But they chose to completely disregard Africa and didn't want to do anything in connection to the continent. And for those of us in national security who really care about counterterrorism, that was a top priority. I was pleased to see that actually President Biden made some trips to Africa and some people in his administration. So I think this is something something that will remain to be seen. I think, like Charlie Dent said, I think it definitely is a signal to our international partners, allies, and also adversaries that this Trump 2.0 is going to be somewhat of a roller coaster in unpredictability on terms of what to expect going forward.
Going forward, Congressman Charlie Dent, as you remember those days and working with the White House, This is a question we kind of know the answer to because we're just talking about his first administration, but we're now looking at the 119th. We are definitely looking at a different construct in terms of the ruling party in Congress. We have Speaker Johnson, who we don't know whether he will still be Speaker, whether he'll get the votes, right? He has a margin of advantage here of just 5 seats. Will he maintain speakership? And number 2, will and how will he work with the president on the various things that the president would like to get done? We're just mentioning the countries he mentioned in the last couple of days.
Well, it's whether or not Speaker Johnson will keep his position in a couple of weeks is unclear. He really can't lose any votes. They're walking into this Congress, 219 Republican to 215 Democrat. One Republican House member, Tom Massey, has said he's not going to support Speaker Johnson. So now you're down to 218. He could, I guess, the Speaker could lose maybe just 1 more. He loses 2 more, he's done. And of course, I thought Elon Musk and Donald Trump really did Speaker Johnson a disservice by torpedoing the bipartisan continuing resolution that made Johnson look weak. They kneecapped him. And then a few days later, they passed something quite similar. But I think that right now that Johnson is in a perilous position. If Donald Trump, between now and the Speaker vote, endorses Johnson and urges Republicans to vote for him, then I think he should probably be okay. But again, with Donald Trump, he's just unpredictable in that regard. So we don't know. And then, of course, how's Trump going to work going forward with Johnson? We'll see. With this very narrow majority, Johnson's got a tough enough job just dealing with his own members, and having to deal with Donald Trump on top of that will be a challenge, because we do know that Speaker Johnson will need Hakeem Jeffries and House Democrats to assist him in passing must-pass bills on continuing resolutions, appropriations bills, and debt ceilings. We just know that. There are always going to be about 30-some votes in the Republican conference to vote against those things. So Johnson is in a fairly weak position going in, frankly, no fault of his own.
Congressman, what do you think will happen? Because one of the discussions that have been out in the reporting in the last several days is that what if it takes a week, which was not uncommon in the last Congress, to ratify the next Speaker of the House? And if that doesn't happen, will they be able to ratify the election results, which happens on the 6th? Because if it takes more than a week, then they may not have a Speaker. So how will this happen?
Well, that's a great question. If there is a protracted Speaker fight like we saw last time, it takes some time. It will move past the date. I think it's January 6th again. It will move past the date. It will move past the date of the certification, where the House and the Senate must certify the election result. And so I suspect that might motivate Donald Trump to basically get the House Republicans to rally around one candidate, presumably Johnson, because I suspect Trump would like to have his own election certified. And if there is turmoil in the House, that could disrupt it. So, we're in some uncharted territory. I always thought the easiest vote for a member of Congress was the first one, the Speaker vote. But again, with the House Republican Conference, it has been very fractured for some time now, and the basics of governance have come very difficult. And the easiest thing, electing the Speaker, is hard for them. Just passing funding bills has been excruciatingly difficult for them. They can't. Many times last session they couldn't even pass rules, to bring up a bill. That's another function of the majority party. You pass a rule, can't do it.
And again, Charlie Dent saying all of that very wistfully, right? Thank you so much, Charlie Dent. Thank you so much, Olivia Troye. We appreciate both of your time.